I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, Velocities in Music. Today, guys, we're going to review the 11th studio album of Montreal entitled Paralytic Stalks. It is the 11th, right? It's a lot. They've been around for 15 years or so. Late 90s, they started coming around. You know, a lot of Beatles-esque work and just very underground. You know, coming off of kind of quasi in the Elephant Six Collective, and then taking off and making a slew of albums. You know, got really, really huge in the underground world with the Gay Parade in 1999, I think, and then Coquelicot with Sleeping in the Poppies, if I'm saying that right. And then later on, where I got really into him was in Satanic Panic in the Attic, and then Sunlandic Twins, and then when I was so excited in 2007 when Hissing Fauna Are You the Destroyer came out, and it's a complete sound change where Kevin Barnes, the lead guy behind driving all the of Montreal albums, is you know, completely emoting on and making these really just aggressive quasi-electronic and guitar tracks that, you know, a whole different direction. And then in 2007 or 8 when Skeletal Lamping came out, and you know, it's a whole new direction. And then a couple years ago we had the last album, False Priest, which was a much more funk-influenced album. So this band has been everywhere. They've done everything, and they've always stayed true to having a very of Montreal sound. That is, they are part and parcel with the praise and what I look for in a band when I say they got to own their sound. They can wear their influences on their sleeves, but they absolutely have to make their sound their own, and Of Montreal champions that like a boss. Now, Paralytic Stalks is a whole new direction. I want to read Kevin Barnes' description he made of one of the songs that I think fits for the entire album. He said, "It's just sort of experimenting with anti-tonality and dissonance and things that you don't really find that much in pop music, but you do find in classical music." With that in mind, he took an approach with this album that was much more in a free composition form, to where you know, before, where you had strong driving crazy bass that's really kind of the signature of the later Of Montreal sound, and a lot of electronics. That's still here. It's not as prevalent, but what you really have is a shift from the instrumentation providing the melody. Now you have the vocals being the main driver of melody when there is melody. And that's only part of the time. A lot of these tracks take off, and like the closing track is over 13 minutes. There's several very long tracks on this album, and so you'll have these pieces where they start in one form, and then they'll completely freeform and go into another form, or maybe into no form, just into ambience for a while. And that is the nature of free composition music. It's a very different approach for Kevin Barnes. Now, Tom, what were your insights on Paralytic Stalks?
Well, it is funny listening to this album coming off of False Priest from 2 years ago, because I don't know if you watched our False Priest review, but I love that album.
Yeah, me too.
I believe I gave it a 90. It was one of my favorites of the year because I love that funk sound, and False Priest had a lot of really strong songwriting, a lot of good vocal hooks with that crazy funk sound. Now, there's still a lot of kind of funk influence in this, but it moves towards more of a psychedelic kind of stage in their band progression. Where it's, you know, you mentioned like classical music. This is like classical music if the instrumentals were switchboards and crazy sounds, because it's that kind of composition, just these sounds washing together. And I think my biggest problem with it, though, is while I do like the crazy sounds, they don't set it up with good songwriting to me. I feel like a lot of the vocal melodies aren't really that great, like you said, where there are vocal melodies. Some of them are really good, and those are my track picks. For instance, the very last thing you hear on the album is this nice kind of piano ballad deal that Kevin Barnes does, and his vocals are great. The melody's great there. But at that point, it's a little too late, I feel like. I feel like maybe that would have worked better in the middle of the album somewhere. And then you would have had a little more dynamics. You would have had a little more flow, highs and lows. But I feel like this album is just kind of a hodgepodge of sounds thrown together. And that was a little frustrating for me. Another thing that frustrated me was the lyrics. He's always had crazy lyrics, but as of like their past work, where, I mean, like Gay Parade, the lyrics tell a story, and you can connect with him, you can connect with these characters that he creates. False Priest, for example, you know, coming like 10 years later, more than 10 years later, is a lot crazier. But I feel like the crazy lyrics on False Priest worked because they were just setting a mood. They were setting that fun, upbeat funk mood. Now this album, Kevin Barnes, he's gone much more personal with the lyrics.
Almost back to the hissing fauna stage,
yeah,
right?
In fact, if you read, I listened to this album a lot when it was streaming on spin.com, and there's kind of like a paragraph for each song of Kevin Barnes kind of describing the song and the sound and what the lyrics are about. And so many of these are so personal, you know, dealing with existential type things and why humans are the way they are, and then anywhere from there to personal relationships. But I feel like he doesn't do a good job of conveying those ideas in a way that people can connect with
and understand.
Because, I mean, understand. You know, you got to understand. I'm a literature major. I have a degree in English, focusing on literature, and I didn't even know a lot of the words on this album. I have a pretty extensive vocabulary, but I
play Words with Friends with them. I get destroyed.
It's insane. Our Words with Friends games. But if Kevin Barnes played Words with Friends with me,
man,
he would dominate me.
Right.
But I don't even understand what he's saying. And when you're trying to write personal songs and make a personal connection with people, but you use these really highfalutin words that people aren't going to be able to connect to, you're kind of missing the mark and you're overshooting. Now, that doesn't mean you need to dumb things down.
Right.
And some of the best lyricists out there, you know, stretch themselves and stretch the listener. But I just feel like this is way too above and beyond to actually make a point and a connection with the listener.
And when you combine that with this just cascading, just wash of a sound that's just so busy and all this stuff going on at once, either that or nothing at all is happening, you know, it just makes the album so unapproachable and so it's impossible to love almost, and to me it's just kind of an upside down view of what Of Montreal is. Now, I'm all for experimental bands like Of Montreal continuing to do what they do best and experiment. I just wish that Of Montreal would have taken it, and if they're really gonna do this sort of direction, to really embrace it, to go further with it, almost get it out of their system, you know, whatever they need to do, go entirely ambient, go entirely into this different realm. Instead, I feel like Paralytic Stalks flirts with it, and they do like half and half. Like there's some times where they're trying to do the old thing and incorporate their old sound that you've heard on the past couple of Montreal albums, and you know, with the funk influences, and in, you know, especially in the tracks like Spiteful Intervention and Dour Percentage, you have a lot of more regular Of Montreal melodies coming out. But then, you know, some of the sections of the last tracks on the album where they're just completely off in ambient land, I can't really justify. I want to just hear one cohesive idea, and instead I just have just barfing of just an entire just Kevin Barnes' musical ambition, and the guy is clearly intelligent and clearly knows is a talented artist, but he needs to be a little bit more focused for me to get into it anyway.
And going back to that emotional connection, you know, I mentioned the lyrics not really conveying that, but also just the vocal performance and the instrumental performance doesn't really create an emotional palette to work with until like the very end of the album.
Right. And it's still not quite as up to par from a vocal or instrumentation perspective as other Of Montreal albums.
Yeah.
Overall, there were aspects of this that I like, plus I'm a little biased because I'm a huge Of Montreal fan. I'm giving this a 60. It's on the cusp of just not cutting it for me, but there are some saving graces that, you know, the fact that it's Of Montreal doing of what Of Montreal does, that allows me to still get some enjoyment out of it.
I'm going 59.
Okay. Where were you guys at? I mean, this is a really polarizing album, so really interested to hear what other Of Montreal fans hear. So leave us a comment at www.velocitiesandmusic.com or youtube.com/velocitiesandmusic. Also, like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. Send us a message. That's where we get most of our ideas about what to review and our requests, and, you know, kind of just a conversation going about the albums we review. So please send us a note. We'd love to talk with you. I'm Jake.
I'm Tom.
And we are VIMTV, moving music critique forward.